What is up, guys? Frosty here today for another Frosty Features. Today we have our first and my most excited version character in the Nightstalker team that is coming to MSF. I got lucky and got a 100 shard drop on Blade, so I have unlocked him already, which is super exciting. But what this is a comic book background on the tunes that you use in Marvel Strike Force, and I am your guide through the pages past. So, let's get going. So, this is the blog post description that is given by Scopely. I will read this now, and then we will rate it at the end of the feature. So, here we go. During Eric Brooks's birth, his mother was bitten by a vampire, giving him the strengths of a vampire, but none of their weaknesses. With superhuman strength, immunity to vampire bites, and the ability to sense the supernatural, Eric trained in martial arts and swordsmanship to become the ultimate vampire hunter. He adopted the name Blade and embarked on a relentless mission to rid the world of the undead, even coming face to face with the deadliest vampire of all, Dracula. So, that is the description that Scopely has given us. We will rate that at the end of ours. So, this is our man. This is Blade. Name, Eric Brooks. First appearance is Tomb of Dracula, number 10 in 1973. He appears as a vampire hunter, and his main goal is to kill Dracula, and he kills him 3 issues later, and by the 4th issue, he is revived because 1, comics, because 2, the title is Tomb of Dracula, not Blade. Powers and abilities. So, he actually has a very interesting set of powers, right? He is what in the comics and movies and things that they're referred to as a daywalker. He's what is, I think I pointed out a little bit later, but he's a dampier. So, not quite a vampire. He's sort of like a half vampire. So he's superhuman in every way. We've got superhuman strength, speed, agility, durability, things like that. He has some interesting qualities, though. He does have an ailment transferal, right? So, he can still drink blood like a vampire, though he chooses not to, unless there's like a huge thing. There's a big point in the movie about this. But one of the things he can do, it's sort of the attempt being the opposite of what a vampire does. So instead of draining blood, let's say you have some sort of sickness, strep or something, I don't know. He can kind of like actually suck the sickness out of you in the form of teeth going into your neck. Or maybe another vein. Anyway, he can like take ailments out of a person and put them in himself. And because he has regenerative healing, because he's superhuman and all these things, he can kind of control it. Also on occasion, Blade shows aspects of using low-end magic. So he very much is not a master of the magic arts, but he has the ability to use a couple of like very baseline spells, which is kind of interesting. But for the most part, we just see him being a martial artist, ripping and tearing through vampires with a katana, which is really what we all want to see. Aliases, Ronin. We actually talked about this a little bit in Frosty Features Ronin, about Blade taking up the mantle for a short period of time. He does take on the moniker of Ronin for a little while. Spider Hero at the same time. Also, he takes on that one. And then Switchblade. There is a short stint where Blade gets a hold of the Darkhold and reads the wrong page, and he becomes evil for a short period of time. He gets all like hulked out looking, and his neck gets all elongated, and he has like a freaking venom, like a little venom tongue, which is kind of weird. But he goes by Switchblade for a short period of time until somebody finds the Darkhold and kind of reverses it. So those are the 3 things he goes by other than Blade. Affiliations, the Midnight Suns. Famous video game came out recently. We'll talk about the Midnight Suns a little bit in the notable events later on. Avengers, we do see him deal with the work with the Avengers on a few occasions. I am one of the few comic book readers that enjoys the comic book arc of Heroes Reborn. So with Heroes Reborn, Blade is one of the main characters, and I quite like it. And he's working with the Avengers in that one. He's reassembling the Avengers. He is part of Strike Force. Strike Force is not a point in the comics that I think is a super big highlight, but I like to point it out because we're playing Marvel Strike Force and words. And then also he is part of a team called the Nightstalkers, which I had forgotten about for a while until going back and rereading things for this feature. So the Nightstalkers are very much a very minor team, but they do exist in Marvel continuity, which is the team that we are on in MSF, which with that, kudos to MSF for actually making that work out, because Blade is sort of that main member of the team, like I said. None of the other team members on Marvel Strike Force are actually a part of Nightstalkers other than Blade. And we will illustrate that in a bit. Background: Soho, London, and he's a Dampier. So we'll talk about his origin coming up, but ultimately he was born in Soho, London, and to a mother who was dead, who dies, and he gets raised in a brothel in Soho, London, until he's like 9, and then he kind of moves on. And then he's a Dampier. So we'll talk about what that means, but ultimately it means that he's only part vampire. Who died? His mother. So we talked about a vampire, Deacon Frost, is feeding on his mother while he's being born. In doing so, because of the umbilical cord still being attached to Eric, some of the enzymes, the vampire juices, if you will, get into him, turning him into a Dampier. In this process, his mother is killed. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Fun facts, interesting things about Blade. He is a jazz trumpeter. We'll talk about him being trained here in a bit, but he was actually the person that trained him in martial arts, also trained him in jazz trumpet, which is kind of fun. Also, the trench coat, the iconic, the big thing. So when we first see Blade in the clip, I usually will show the little comic clips for the notable events. In the first clip, you see him, his original design, he's wearing like a green shirt. He's got stakes across his chest. He's got an afro, and if he's already wearing the sunglasses or whatever. The trench coat, it becomes famous because of the Blade movie with Wesley Snipes. It is actually one of my favorite Marvel movies of all time. It has been for years. So the trench coat, after the movie, became a very iconic part of Blade. So they wanted to include that in the comics. Always trying to take advantage of the popular things that come out of the movies. So with the trench coat, there's a situation where Blade had fought for a very long time against a bunch of vampires, and actually Wolverine shows up, and this is Wolverine with the cowboy hat, right? We actually Wolverine with the cowboy hat and a trench coat, right? And Blade is bleeding profusely, and Wolverine, to help keep him warm, gives him this trench coat to keep him warm or whatever in the continuity of the comics. So Blade actually has this trench coat from Wolverine, which is pretty cool, which is pretty sick. So I just wanted to point that out. It's a neat thing. Moving on. Relationships. Lucas and Tara Vanessa Cross. So his mother's name is Tara Cross. It's Tara Cross, and then when she goes to Soho under order of Lucas, she changes her name to Vanessa. Saffron Calder is an ex-lover of Blade's. She actually comes up and is saved when we start talking about Nightstalkers. Jacqueline Fallsworth, another ex-lover, a notable ex-lover of Blade's. And then Jamal Afari is Blade's mentor. And once again, we'll kind of dive into that a little bit. A very important thing that doesn't really come up because it doesn't exist is for my fans of the movie, in the 616 canon, Marvel 616 main comic continuity that we typically stick to on Frosty Features, Whistler doesn't exist. Abraham Whistler, he's the guy that's making all the gadgets and stuff in the Blade movies. And there are alternate comic realities where Whistler does exist. I think there's 2 or 3 of them. But actually, the Blade in the comics does not have Whistler. So that's something very important. He's not there. That's why he's not there. He's not actually a part of the 616 storyline. So, just so everybody knows, he's an awesome character from the movies. I'm not taking anything away from him, just pointing out he actually is not a character in the comics, and that's okay. Blade is one of those big characters that changed after the movie came out, and in some of those alternate realities, they had Whistler, but the 616 Blade really never needed him because he was so established beforehand, right? So these are very important things to consider when looking at some of these characters, right? So with that, let's get into notable events. So notable events, his origin. We got to talk about his origin. There's a lot going on there. So all the way back in 1973, what we have is Lucas and his wife is pregnant, and Lucas Cross is a part of a secret society that is called the Order of Tirana. And one thing I find really interesting, so all the way back to in this date, right? Well, and some of this would have been not retcon, but written in a little bit later. But Lucas Cross, Order of Tirana, this is a vampiric order. It's an order that essentially all we know is that it has something to do with vampires, and it has some sort of significance in that way, and it becomes obsessed with Blade as he goes through his career. Lucas Cross is a part of this. Lucas Cross is alive, but that's all we know, and it has never went as of this recording date. They have never gone back and actually like explained or elaborated on the situation they're in. So very interesting thing that we have to kind of take into consideration. Quite different. So Lucas Cross has run into some trouble in Latveria, and he's going to get arrested. So he sends his wife Tara away, and she goes to her pregnant wife Tara away, and she goes to London. She goes to Soho. She goes to Soho, and she finds a refuge in a brothel where she changes her name to Vanessa Cross. And while she's there, she ends up having like complications with her pregnancy. So she's like, oh my god, what am I gonna do? I gotta go find a doctor. And she goes to the doctor, and he's like, hey, I'm having trouble with my pregnancy. I'm having this baby. What am I gonna do? And he goes, ha, you want to talk about trouble with your pregnancy? I'm a vampire. I'm gonna eat you. And she was like, oh no. And then Deacon's like, it's Deacon Frost, right? Dr. Deacon Frost. He's like, oh yeah. And so he jumps in. He starts, draining her of blood. She goes, oh no, again. And then Blade pops out and is like, oh no. And everybody's like, oh no. And so Vanessa dies. Blade becomes a vampire because he essentially is partially transformed in this situation. And Deacon's like, all right, that was delicious. I may have messed up with this child though, so I'm gonna kill this thing really quick. And then all of the women in the brothel appear, and they're like, no, you might have killed our friend, but you're not killing that baby. And they chase Deacon Frost off, and Blade is rescued and raised by the women of the brothel until he is 9. And when he is 9, there is a point in which he's living on the streets, whatever, and he teaches himself how to use knives and daggers, etc., and he becomes efficient with those. And he is walking home from school one day, walking back to the brothel, and he runs across this old man being attacked by these other men, and he realizes soon that these other men aren't regular men. They are in fact vampires. And he's like, oh no, this old man's being attacked by vampires. I better help him. I've got a knife. And the old man ended up being Jamal Afari, who was a vampire hunter, and he a homeless vampire hunter. And he's like, don't worry not, child, I've got this shizniffle. And he ends up killing all the vampires in front of Blade, in front of Eric. At the time, wasn't Blade yet. And he's like, hello, young chap with the knife. I like your spunk. How about I come live with you in the brothel, and I'll teach you the ways of trumpet and martial arts. And Blade was like, oh boy, let's do that. So they go back to the brothel. Old man living in a brothel. You know how it is. He didn't run that thing. He's playing trumpet for somebody. Anyway, so they go back to the brothel. He teaches him martial arts. He teaches him the trumpet. And Blade grows up, and his main goal is to hunt down Deacon Frost. But then at one point he comes across, and this is what we're seeing in what we're seeing in our clip here is his birth. There is a point where Blade comes across Jamal Afari, and Jamal's not acting right, and turns out Dracula got a hold of him and turned him into a vampire, and Blade is forced to kill him to save Blade's own life, and Blade swears to kill not only Deacon Frost, but also Dracula, which, once again, I said before, he does fairly quickly, but Dracula likes to, revive because he's Dracula, and you can't exactly kill him 100%. But upon the death of Jamal Afari, this is when we get the actual factual Blade, right? So that's kind of where he starts. There he is. We got him. I also could have said his mother did have to die for him to be a thing, but also Jamal Afari had to die. So can't be a superhero, supervillain without that. Moving on. So Blade, surprisingly enough, right, since 1973, Blade actually doesn't have that much. He has a lot less comic lines than you would think he does, just due to his like kind of base level of popularity, especially in the last few years. We've seen him a lot more, especially since like Heroes Reborn and things like that. But overall, in the actual context of comic books, especially since 1973, he doesn't have that much stuff. He's in quite a bit, but one of the things I want to talk about that's pertinent to MSF is Nightstalkers. So in the situation of the Nightstalkers, what we have is ultimately Doctor Strange, my man, the Doctor himself, he gets to a point where he's like, you know what's a really bad threat to humanity? Vampires, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a spell to kill all vampires, right? Just a little genocide. Don't worry about it. So he uses what is called the Montesi formula, and what he does is he kills all vampires, but it turns out, this is from the Darkhold, I believe, what he didn't realize is that this spell is temporary, and he becomes aware of this, and he's like, the spell is beginning to weaken. And so what he had done was he took out most vampires, specifically Dracula, for a while, and he's like, okay, this isn't gonna work. I need to do something. I happen to know of these three vampire affiliated vampire hunters. I'm gonna bring them together, call them the Nightstalkers, and we'll start off killing some little vampire things, and they'll work their way up, and eventually they'll be able to kill Dracula when he's resurrected. Let's go! So he brings together Frank Drake, who is a descendant of Dracula, but not looking to kill humans. He brings together Hannibal King, who is he is a vampire but has never tasted human blood, and he refuses to do so. And he brings together Blade. These are the Nightstalkers in the comics. There's a couple affiliations with they work with Ghost Rider, Johnny Blaze a little bit, and they also work with. It's not coming to me. Oh Lord. Well, Doctor Strange. We'll say Doctor Strange. It's true. But ultimately, they're brought together to become this team of vampire hunters. And there's a lot of tension between Hannibal King and Blade, because Blade's like, you're like a full vampire. What are you doing? Like, no. So a lot of the fun with their kind of team dynamic is the fact that they have a lot of tension between themselves. So they end up becoming this thing that is, oh goodness. Let me edit too, because I straight up do not remember what it's called. Something Incorporated. I wrote it down. Dark Strength. Borderline, that's right. So they, hold on. So they end up, Dark Strange puts them together. The vampires know them as the Nightstalkers, but their official name, their legal name where they get paid is Borderline Investigations or Borderline Inc. And which ends up actually just fully turning into the Nightstalkers, which fully turns into, spoiler alert, into the Midnight Suns. So after they get established, they this is like kind of the most notable of their moves, because this is ultimately what makes them the Midnight Suns. They become established, and they get hired by an unknown client at first to go track down and kill Ghost Rider or Johnny Blaze. And they're like, all right, yeah, we love money, and he's some sort of demon. We could do this. And so they start tracking him down, and then, heroes fighting heroes. It only takes a few minutes for them to be like, hey, wait a minute. This guy's a demon, but he's a good guy, like the vampire on our team. What's going on here? And so after conversing with Johnny Blaze, they're like, oh, it was actually the mother of demons, Lilith, that hired you all, and we need to kill her. So the Nightstalkers plus Johnny Blaze go and track down Lilith, who we find out in the course of events decided to kidnap Saffron Calder, who was Blade's lover at the time, and they become at odds, and with the help of Johnny Blaze and a Doctor Strange, they take out Lilith, and they get Saffron back. She's fine, and from this they develop the Midnight Suns. Which is cool. So they develop the Midnight Suns and they operate as the Midnight Suns. Actually, I think they're the Midnight Suns by the time they take out Lilith. And then the Nightstalkers become a sect of the Midnight Suns. So they're in the Midnight Suns, but they're only part-time. Which is why when you think Midnight Suns, you might think of Blade, but you don't happen to think of our other two, Frank or Hannibal, because they're actually not in it all the time. So there it is. So those are the two kind of things. That's really all the Nightstalkers were quite a short kind of lived thing. But there's a lot of really cool stuff. I like a lot of the Blade content. It's a little bit more adult than certain comics. Not that comics really are for kids. I know that was sort of a stereotype in like the 90s and the 80s, but Blade leans more horror a lot of the time than say X-Men, right? So that's kind of where I'm looking at it for. So next up is power level. Scopely, MSF does not care about power level, but here in Frosty Features we do. Now the way that this works, if you are a multiversal threat, that means you can end all of reality, not just your reality, but the multiverse itself at a whim, toppling that whole thing. Universal means you can end your reality, maybe then hop on over to another reality and end that one. Cosmic means that you are a threat on a planetary scale, taking out something like small planetary bodies up to a solar system or galaxy with enough time. Nuclear means you have power equivalent to that of a nuclear bomb, taking out things like small cities up to a planetary body, once again with enough time. Super Soldier means that you have abilities beyond all capabilities of human beings, having things like super strength, super speed, super reflexes, what have you. And City, Super Soldier, being able to take out things like brick walls up to a city block. City means that you are a human being level individual who is trained to the absolute and utter peak of human ability, like an Olympic athlete. This is where we have a lot of our secret agents, our ninjas, our mercenaries, and things like that in the Marvel Universe. And then there's Greg. Greg is the undead Asgardian that spawned by Hela in Marvel's Strike Force, and without Undying or Hela to back him up, Greg isn't strong at all. He's not worth it. He can't do it on his own. So, in the event that I am kayaking down my favorite fishing spot, and Greg decided to play shark by himself in the middle of the situation, in the middle of the river, and he's got his little sword sticking up out of the water, and he's coming up to me, and he's decided that he's gonna make me into his little meal. I'm gonna use my oar and beat the living crap out of Greg. So I, as a regular human being, theoretically could take Greg in this situation. Pretend shark versus regular human in a kayak. So, for the sake of argument, we are going to equate Greg to the strength of a regular human being. So, in the case of Blade, there's a couple of things. I already said Blade is superhuman. He super strength, super speed, super reflexes. He does have a supernatural sense, as pointed out in the blog post. He can tell where supernatural beasts and things are going on. He has a sense of smell. He does not, and I haven't necessarily said that yet, but ultimately all of this contributes to him being stronger than human level. He does inherit, as he goes on, in fighting, because it kind of, the sequence of event through Blade's life very much is like, I'm gonna hunt Deacon Frost, now I'm gonna hunt Dracula. Dracula's dead, Deacon Frost is dead, Morbius, right? And then there's a situation where Morbius bites him, and since Morbius isn't a regular vampire, he gives Blade additional powers, so Blade gets more classic, turning into bats and flying and things like that kind of powers. So, in the case of Blade, what we have here is somebody that's at the Super Soldier's side, but depending on which timeline and who's writing Blade, you actually have a character that is on the high end of Super Soldier, very much being able to compete with somebody like a Captain America, especially if he has some of his bat powers and things like that. Very, very, very fun character. A lot of things to go on here. To this blog post. So, I have a lot of issues with this blog post. It's very generalized, and it like tries to be descriptive, but it kind of it brushes over everything in a really crazy way. Even being like, was bitten by a vampire. Like, Deacon Frost is like the main dude in the Blade movies. He's a really big deal. They could have pointed out Deacon Frost, but maybe it's because they have no intention of bringing him to the game, because in this blog post, they make a very big point to point out Dracula, implying that Dracula's probably down the pipeline, making him more important than Deacon Frost. I don't know. Dracula's kind of a thing all over the place, and honestly, he shouldn't be as big of a deal as he is. There even is talk, there's a storyline where Blade is fighting the original vampire, which is not Dracula. Dracula just happens to be a very strong one. Glazing over Deacon Frost in here, talking about how he has all the powers of a vampire. That's not true until Morbius bites him. When Morbius bites him, then he gets all that stuff, and we don't bring that up in here, so it's just sort of a mishmash. And once again, if this is writing new lore, that's fine, but based on what it is referencing, it's different and therefore kind of wrong. We're comparing it to 616. It doesn't talk about his mentor whatsoever. It pretty much just says, hey, he's half vampire and he's a vampire hunter. That's cool. So you have no motivation as to why he's a vampire hunter. So with that, I don't think they tried. It really is. It's one of those things. I say sometimes they write the blog post and it's like they kind of remember the character. Maybe they've seen the movies and maybe they read a comic book a few years ago. And they're like, I can do this without looking it up, right? They didn't bother to go back and just double check any of this stuff. It very much, I almost put that it was twisted. It's close, but not right. Therefore, I don't like it. There it is. And that was Frosty Features Blade. I hope that you all enjoyed it. Please let me know your favorite Blade moments in the comments. I'd love to hear it. Here on YouTube, it doesn't. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything but a couple of clicks, and it would help me out a lot. Also, as a reminder, I stream on Sundays, 8 a.m. Central Standard Time at the link above, where we do Frosty Features Live. I hope that you all enjoyed this. I hope that you all have a fantastic, fantastic weekend, and most importantly, stay cool.